I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Yes? All right. So thank you everybody for coming. This is a very great debate. I'm happy that Roshan is joining me. When we look at the dynamics of New Turkey, economic, political, social, and its challenges, I agree that I will do the foreign policy part of this conversation and the economic growth and democracy part of it, and Roshan will look at more domestic politics, and then in the Q&A we can try the loose ends. I wanted to start by thanking CEFTUS for putting together this program. I work with many NGOs around the world that do work on Turkey, but this is definitely a commendable institution. I think they do great work here in London for the broader Turkey community, including as well as Cypriots and others. I think that's really excellent that they're doing this job, promoting the rights of the British-Turkish community, and also those others from Turkey, I think including the Kurds and others. But I think in general, this organization that has done an incredible amount of raising Turkey's profile in the House. So here we are, the House of Commons. So what I want to do is look at three things. One is Turkey's economic transformation. Gareth, in his kind introduction, mentioned that I recently wrote a book called The Rise of Turkey. It really is a book that looks at Turkey's economic rise. And then it says, Turkey has been transformed economically, but what happens politically next? So that question is still open. Political transformation that is necessary, that should go with economic transformation, and that's, I think, really open to debate when we get to the conversation. So let me start with the economic part of this transformation. It's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I really wanted to describe it for the broader audience, and the way I did it is I'm an historian, and I thought that I wanted to make the information accessible to people. Anyone who watches BBC or CNN, I thought should be able to relate to this book without having to have expertise on Turkey. So I framed it as a travelogue. Each chapter in the book takes place in a city in Turkey. In each city there's a theme, politics or culture, which then links up to a discussion of one of the issues of modern Turkey. It's whether it's politics and secularism and foreign policy or Kurds, the situation of the non-Muslim communities, the country's opposition and the governing party, and the book starts off with this story, The Rise of Turkey. It starts with the economic transformation, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to write this monograph, because I think it's an important story for us to tell. Only about 12 years ago, when just before the AKP, Turkey's current ruling party, Justice and Development Party, only before 12 years ago when it came to power, Turkey was a country of mostly poor people. Today, it's a country of mostly middle-income people. People have been lifted out of poverty, and that's probably not going to change. Whether or not the economy slows down, Turkey's economic structure has been transformed in the last decade. Now, these reforms, granted, started before Erdogan came to power, but he's the one who completed the reforms. He's the one who took them to fruition. And what we saw in Turkey in the last 12 years is the emergence of a middle-class society where middle-class voters and middle-class citizens now make up a majority, if perhaps a plurality, if not a majority of that country's population. That's great, I think, because it means a lot of people now live better off than they did. The factor that I like most from my book is that before AKP came to power, infant mortality rate in Turkey for 1,000 babies was in 40s. That's a number comparable to Middle East countries. Now that number is 13, that's a number comparable to European countries. Turks live like Europeans, which was not the case 12 years ago when it comes to economic standards. That is the main reason why Erdogan wins elections. He has won 7, and I think so long as the economy grows and is strong, he'll continue to win elections, and that's going to be a brighter part of his legacy in Turkey. Why has Turkey done so well economically in the last 10 years? Not because there's anything special about the government or about the people. I think it's because Turkey has been lucky. In the sense that it sits in a neighborhood where it is surrounded by unstable neighbors. I'll go through a list of Turkey's neighbors and you get the conclusion. Turkey's neighbors are Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Russia, Georgia, Ukraine, Armenia, Bulgaria, and Greece. Not one has not suffered in the last decade from economic downturn, economic meltdown, invasion, war, occupation, or a multiplicity of these problems. So there's a wonderful German word called Schadenfreude. If you know the meaning, it suggests that you take delight in other people's suffering. Without indulging in Schadenfreude, the Turks' luck is that their neighbors are unlucky. So Turkey has been attracting investment international investment that would go to its neighbors. It has more than increased the amount of investment coming to the country by 10 times in the last decade on an annual basis. It attracts now about $40–50 billion, and I think that is what drives Turkey's economic growth. It is what has increased incomes. As a result of that, whatever metrics you use, I think we have seen a general improvement, not just only in living standards and incomes, but also in the way people live. I would argue that Erdogan wins elections in Turkey primarily by selling mortgages, vacations to Italy, and high-speed rail train. He does sell mortgages because anybody knows the word for mortgage in Turkish? It's mortgage. Because the concept did not exist before AKP because we had triple-digit inflation and it was not possible for people to invest in buying homes and other things, and I think it has become possible only with this government. So I'm just trying to give you a general sense of improved lives and living standards, which transforms intellectual victories. But remember that this growth is mostly driven by international money. I'll come to that at the end of my conversation. There's a very important linkage here. This is the bright side of AKP's legacy in the new Turkey. And what else is there? There's less than bright side of the legacy. Part of that is increased authoritarianism in the government. By whatever measure you use, again, you're seeing that while incomes have increased in Turkey and the people look better than they used to. When you look at liberties, there's been first a plateau of liberties and then a deterioration. Meaning, in the first part of the last decade, Turkey's liberties as measured by various indices improved. Turkey then obviously qualified to become a candidate country for accession talks with the European Union. Then it plateaued towards the end of the last decade in terms of liberties, and in some ways it has actually gone down. So that's ironic that economic transformation, Turkey becoming a middle-class society, has not been accompanied by a fast improvement in liberties. By most measures, I think we have seen a plateauing of liberties, and by some other measures, even a decreasing of liberties. I'll come to that in a second also. But let me look at the other difficult part of Erdogan's legacy, which is foreign policy, and then I'll come at the end looking at more domestic side and the future of liberal democracy. I have to tell you that I'm an optimist, so in case you didn't realize. My ending message is positive even with this challenge coming up. But let me look at the challenge first. One of the main shifts that I think the AKP elites implemented in Turkey by the first part of the last decade was that they shifted the country's foreign policy orientation from a country that was simply seeking to join the European Union, period, to a country that wanted to become a Middle East power. In the beginning, this looked like it was working because Turkey had economic power, its products and companies were recognized in the Middle East. So Turkey had become what you would typically call a soft power nation. It had economic power, which kind of allowed it to flex its muscles in the Middle East. And to this end, I think Turkey's foreign policy also envisioned, or AKP's foreign policy envisioned making Turkey a Middle East power. An analogy would be the following. I think before Erdogan came to power, most Turks looked at the Middle East the way Argentinians look at Latin America. So Argentinians think of themselves as Europeans who live next to Latin America, in Latin America, but they're not really Latin American, they're not from there. The Turkish view was, Turks are Europeans, they live next to the Middle East, but they're not really from there. I think the AKP has shifted that viewpoint, probably irreversibly. It's gone. The AKP's argument was that Turkey is not the Argentina of the Middle East, it's the Brazil of the Middle East. It's the largest economy, and it is, and therefore it should run this region. But just as Brazil does not run Latin America single-handedly, Turkey does not run the Middle East. And unlike Brazil, which does not face threats from its neighbors, Turkey does face threats from its Middle East neighbors. So the analogy stops there. You have seen this in terms of the Syrian war, the way obviously it has become into a security threat for Turkey, from an opportunity for Turkey. In the beginning, this was considered an opportunity for Turkey to become a regional power because Turkey wanted to oust the Assad regime. If that policy succeeded, it would make Turkey a player in Syria. It didn't happen. Not only has that policy failed, but also Turkey now faces the threat of a surviving Assad regime, who has in the past used proxies against Turkey and will probably do the same again. The most recent bombing in Reyhanlı, which killed 51 people, is the worst terror attack from Turkish soil in modern history. It's probably carried out by people close to the Syrian regime and shows you the ability of the regime toward Turkey, so that stays. But on top of that, now you have a second threat coming from Syria, which is ISIS. at this in the Q&A. So Turkey's long 800-kilometer border now is also a border that exposes the country to twin threats. The country's relations with Iraq are checkered. Turkey's strong ties with Iraqi Kurds has angered the central government there. And Turkey's ties with Iran are basically an area where in Iraq there's a proxy political battle between Turkey and Iran. Turkey supports the Sunni Arabs and Kurds in the north. Iranians support the Shiite majority government in the center. In Syria, there is a proxy battle, meaning Turkey and Iran are actually fighting through their proxies. Turkey's proxies are the rebels. Iran's proxy is the regime, and they're only 1 degree apart. And I think that leaves Turkey isolated and alienated in the region. In its less immediate neighborhood, I think Turkey's policy of putting all its political capital behind the Muslim Brotherhood has failed. The Muslim Brotherhood is a political party, but it's not the only political party in the Arab world. And Turkey's policy has been supporting just that. And that policy has failed, I think, because if you want to be a great power in the Middle East, you need to support all horses in the race, not just one horse. And Turkey just supported one horse, which was also the losing horse. That is the horse of the Muslim Brotherhood. In Egypt, the Brotherhood has been ousted from power. In Tunisia, it has stepped down. In Libya, it's sidelined. And in Syria, it has been sidelined by the hardliners on the battlefront. So that leaves Turkey with no friends, no allies, no proxies in the region, very isolated. Not shocking, therefore, that the most recent poll by the German Marshall Fund, which looks at attitudes among Turks towards countries and institutions, found out that for the first time, support for EU accession in Turkey has gone back over 50% again in the most recent years. Support used to be very high, as you remember, 70s and 80s, it went down, it's come back up again, which means a lot of Turks are discovering the wisdom of EU accession and realizing that maybe it's not such a bad thing for Turkey to try to be the Argentina of this region, because being Brazil, without the capacity to be Brazil and the assets to be Brazil, exposes you to risks, Syria, ISIS, Assad, and threats, a sense of strategic isolation in a troublesome region. That's, I think, for the Q&A. We can look at that further, and I'm happy to share some more observations on ISIS and Syria. But let me turn to the other issue I wanted to look at, which is, fine, Turkey has been transformed economically, it's wealthier, they feel a little better off. What does that mean for Turkey's future and its democracy? As I said, I'm optimistic. Here's why. One reason I'm optimistic is because what Turkey has right now is and I know those of you who are Turkish in the room know this very well, it's a very polarized society, right? But I actually think that there's nothing wrong with societies being polarized. The only society that I know that is not polarized is North Korea. It's okay for societies to be polarized, so long as they are democratic. Meaning, so long as scores are settled democratically, governments change democratically, there are free and fair elections. Of course you'll have opposing views. There's nothing wrong with that. Of course you'll have people who won't agree on issues. That's what you have in Turkey. You have political polarization. Sorry, a lot of people are coming in. You have political polarization between two camps. Let's call them supporters of the governing party and opponents of the governing party, right? And Turkey is almost split evenly between these two camps as of the last elections. In the presidential polls, Erdogan received 52% of the vote, but that's not really AKP's vote. We know that because smaller parties did not run in the elections, so he received the votes they'd be getting. And if you look at party base, AKP received 45% of the vote in the last elections. The opposition parties, when you put them together, match that constituency. So you have two disparate halves of a country in which society is very divided. And what that leaves Turkey with is the challenge of how you bring these disparate halves to coexist. And to agree that they can both live in this country, it belongs to both of them, not one pushing exclusively the other. I think part of the rising dynamic is the middle class that has grown out of Erdogan's own politics. I've argued in some recent articles I've done, including an op-ed for the New York Times, that Erdogan has actually created his own political nemesis, the middle class. When the Gezi Park rallies took place, how was it organized? It was organized on this, on smartphones. And how did the Turks buy the smartphones? With the money that Erdogan gave them. And how are they writing on these smartphones? They're all literate. Because Turkey is 95% literate, it will become 100% literate by the end of this decade. It's impossible when a society is all literate all connected to the world, to rip it apart from the world. That's why I think Turkey's long-term trajectory is just fine. If it can continue to find a way to balance its disparate halves. It's also in everyone's interest, I argue, for him to keep Turkey an open society and to consolidate liberal democracy. Why? So why does Erdogan win elections? Because Turkey grows. Why does Turkey grow? Because it attracts investment. And why are people investing in Turkey? I told you it's not because it's special, because it's stable. If it continues to be stable, it will attract investment. That means domestic and foreign policy stability. Turkey looks like its neighbors, economically and politically. Rife with political violence and strife, that is the end of Turkey's growth. That's also the end of Erdogan's electoral victory. So there is invested interest for him to keep the country stable, because that's how it will grow. But there's also a long-term interest for Erdogan to keep Turkey stable. And not only that, but I think to consolidate liberal democracy at home. Why would he do that? Turkey is now what is considered the middle-income economy, which means people are not poor, but they're not really super wealthy. They're in between. The country's income levels are comparable to other middle-income economies. And if there are economists in the room, Turkey is now in what is called the middle-income trap, which means it's very typical for countries to go from being poor to middle income. That has happened to dozens of countries, but it's very rare for countries to go from middle income to becoming high income. That has only happened about a dozen times since the 1960s. That a country went from being middle income, which is where Turkey is, to becoming high income, which is where South Korea is, for example. How do you go from middle income to high income? Turkey is now making cars, that's its main export. You go from a country that makes cars, you go from being a country that makes cars to being a country that's a hub for Google, or whatever that new software is called. And if you want to make Turkey a society that's producing information economy, or whose economy is based on information society, and it's producing value added, it has to become an open society and a liberal democracy. If it is not, investors will not choose Turkey over others, because you want a place with rule of law and openness. That's why you can't ban Twitter and YouTube, even if you are looking at this from the politics of consolidating power, because that means the next time electoral victories are going to be challenged. Why is it important to keep Turkey open society? Because if not, the smart people who are going to come to Turkey and set up Google will not come to Turkey if it's not open. Number three, if it's not open, smart people in Turkey who will work for Google will not stay in Turkey, they'll leave. So ultimately, if I was writing advice to Erdogan, I would write to him and say, it is in your interest, just as it's in Turkey's bigger interest, to keep Turkey open and liberal democracy, because it's the only way Turkey can continue to rise. Ultimately, it helps to win elections, but it's also the only way I think Turkey can keep its halves together. Last point, this is all about economy, but how about the politics of Turkey's disparate halves learning to live together? Just a couple of things. For a very long time, I think Turkey practiced a very unique brand of secularism. In Turkish, it's called laiklik. In English, that'd be laïcité. It's similar to the French version of secularism, which basically said no freedom of religion in education, government, and politics. The operative word is off. There should be no religion in government, education, and politics. That was the Kemalist understanding of secularism. That's gone. Turkey has now moved into a new understanding of secularism as dictated by Erdogan and AKP. It mandates for, this time different, freedom of religion, not freedom from, but freedom of religion in government education, meaning in the earlier period, laïcité defined secularism as freedom from religion in education and government. Now it is freedom of religion, education, and government. I think the only way Turkey is to have a constitution which says you have both freedom of religion in politics and education, and freedom from religion in education and politics, so that these two different halves can coexist, and without that, I think you're going to have constant social tension. So I'll end with this optimistic note, and thank you, everybody.